Okay, so this is Nalini Elkins with Inside Products and Industry Network Technology Council, and today we're going to talk about IPv6 address planning. This is a collaborative project with the India Internet Engineering Society, IIESoc, and INTC, which are both nonprofits. And our funding is for this set of webinars is a grant from ISIF Asia, which is a part of the APNIC Foundation. APNIC, of course, is the Internet Registry for the Asia Pacific region. Thank you so much. We have had grants from Aaron before. In fact, we have one this year, and we will be presenting some of the results of that effort later this year. So great. So what is our vision? Our vision is actually not just to talk, but actually to get things rolling, to start IPv6 deployment at enterprises. That is something which has lagged in our industry. And so what we want to do is provide very specific information and address the very specific needs of large enterprises. And of course, if it applies to middle-sized and small enterprises, all the better. But in particular, large, complex networks. To that end, we're doing 3 different things: training and an analysis of 2 particular pain points, which are security and application conversion. Be looking out for a survey that we will be putting out for the various pain points and the kind of thinking you might want to do when you start about converting applications. And it's not just, how do I say, it's not just the socket calls, it's the entire system, the operational issues that wrap around applications, disaster recovery, embedded BAT files or scripts with embedded addresses and so on. Keep your eyes open for that. And then we want to help enterprises plan their IPv6 deployment. We're working with a couple already, and be looking out for some templates and case studies based on their experience. So what have we done so far? We've done 4 classes. This is the 5th, IPv6 address planning. And for next time, next week, you will have my partner in crime, Mike Ackerman. He will be doing a lab on address planning. We have picked this topic because it is one of the most critical areas for IPv6 real deployment at your enterprise. What is your address plan? How are you going to structure it? And, you know, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I know enterprises who are on their 4th and 5th address plan. Go ahead and get started. And then, you know, see how it goes. You may need to revise. That's fine. A few words about me. I think I'll just skip past this rapidly. You can look at it later if you want. I have a lot of experience in the industry. So let's get to the what we really want to talk about. So what is address planning? Well, address planning is really how am I going to take whatever this address range that I have and divide it up amongst my users. What am I going to assign to my servers? What am I going to assign to my routers? And is it going to be a static address? Is it going to be a dynamic address? Will it be a privacy address? Will it be a EULA? And so all these decisions have to be made. IPv6 gives us the capability to do multiple addresses per interface. Do I want to use that? So there are many, many decisions that have to be made. And obviously, this is a very, very simplistic drawing that I've shown you. In a real network, you may have multiple firewall zones. You may have red zone, green zone, a DMZ. Do you need to think about that? Do you need to have address planning tailored to that? You may also have load balancers, firewall clusters, database clusters. How are you going to think about all this? And you know, every enterprise is going to be different. Every enterprise will have different needs. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the base principles. And in fact, I'll make up some rules as we go along that might serve as guidelines for you guys as you go forth. We can certainly discuss. I was jokingly thinking of naming them the 10 Commandments of address planning, but fortunately I ceased and desisted. So let's review again some of the important prefixes for IPv6. Remember, if I'm talking about something like, excuse me, a /48 or a /8, what I'm talking about is I'm starting with the 0th bit of the first byte, and I'm counting. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bits. I have 8 bits here. So if I have a /8, that is a very, very large address, right? And so there, if I say 00 to XX, and that XX is any number, because this thing can be anything. It can be 0011, 000F, whatever, and so on. If it's a /16, it's this whole first hextet here that I'm thinking about. /32 is one of the ones that comes in very, very useful. Oftentimes, very large enterprises, they will ask for a grant of a /32 from their internet registry. And, you know, I'm just speaking in broad generalities now, but that might not be a bad thing to start at. You know, is go ahead and start at a /32. Gives you a lot of room to maneuver. Now, a /48 is these first 3 hextet here, the portions, however you want to think about it. A /48 is what the general rule is, the general kind of thinking is that I'm going to give a /48 to a particular site. So let's say that I have locations in Carmel Valley, where I live. Then I have another one in San Francisco. Then I have another one in San Jose. Each building might be a /48. Now, of course, it all depends, right? You know, I mean, what is a site? You may have a large campus building. You may wish to make each building within your campus a /48. I've seen people do that. And that's not a bad way to think about it. But if you think about breaking up this /32 into multiple 48s, that's not a bad way to think about that. And then 56 is an interesting one. And I'm going to save this for later. We need to think about why we want 56. I'm just going to give you a heads up. If we're thinking about route aggregation, that's when we may want to think about that. But let's hold off on that. But /64, you notice it's these first 4 hextets, and we've got this last part empty. Now that /64 is going to be for your exact subnet, you know, for the prefix that I might have for my entire home. If you think about it as a router interface prefix, something like that, that's not a bad way to think about it. But one of the important points is this: you notice that there's a lot of address that's left open. And that you might want to leave open so that stateless auto configuration can use that to configure each host ID. We will go over all of this in great detail. This is just an introduction to how some of these prefixes are used and how we'll be thinking about them throughout. So let's think about what an address range is. Let's start with IPv4 because that's much more familiar to us. And so we're used to having something like 204.12.34.5. And so of course your .5 is your host. And then you've got the first three parts, which are your network address and including what subnet you're on. Now, of course, with IPv4, you can get a little crazy and start doing variable length subnet masking. Never should have been invented, but so there it may be further broken out into what is exactly your subnet within there. Let's keep it simple and say, you know, you're on your .34 network. And then of course you see from the 204 that you've got a publicly routable address over there. You can go out over the internet. So let's take that thinking now and do it to IPv6. And now, okay, what I'm telling you now is, how do I say? This is Nalini's best practices. And don't get me wrong, many people agree with me. There are some religious arguments where people will disagree with this kind of layout. And if you are interested, please go up to the V6 Ops email list of IETF and listen to some of those discussions. It has to do with this /64 and whether this should be whether this boundary should really be done. But for now, let's walk before we run. Let's take this as accepted, but know that you may wish to deviate from that. But let's take this. So let's say you get your 48 bits at the very front. Remember, I said already that that was what you might want to have for a site. So how does this play out? Let's say you get something like 2001 DB8 from APNIC or Aaron, something like that. So then you say, well, 8FFF, that might be one of my buildings. Grand. So then we've got this next 16 bits right here. I'm showing that as a 3. You may wish to use that for your subnet. And then you have the rest of it as the interface ID or what each particular host has. At home, what I have from Comcast is they've given me this first /64, and then my iPhone has a different prefix. This laptop has another, and so on. And so that's how you might think of breaking out that address that you have gotten. And so how do you go about getting your IP address? Well, one of the first things that you need to think about is, do I get it from Aaron or APNIC? Do I get it from my internet registry, or do I get it from an ISP? And that's certainly whatever your organization chooses to do. You may get, whatever your policy is. There are sometimes even governmental restrictions on what you can do, or policy restrictions if you're a governmental organization, whatever, however you choose to do it. Another thing you may wish to consider also is that some people wish to be dual homed, or they wish to have addresses from more than one ISP, say for backup or for disaster recovery or just redundancy. You may say, I do not wish to be at the mercy, if you will, of one provider. I wish to have addresses from two, just in case there's a problem with one, I can have a hot backup to the other. So it's easy enough to go up to your registry or your ISP, ask them, how does it work? And this is from Aaron. As I say, I just picked that particular registry, and these are some of their rules for what you get. You can see again what they're saying, that if you're getting it for an enterprise, it depends on how many sites that you have, and we can walk through some of the whole justification things and so on. Mike will do more of that in his talk. It is a very interesting process, is talking to your RIR about what is your, how many sites do you have? What is your justification for asking for what you get? Because certain amounts of space you can get no questions asked, but if you want more, they would like to know a justification. And if you do walk through doing an address plan and then projecting out into the future, why then you may very well have a justification for what you need. Again, Mike will be going into this a great deal more. So let's just think, is a /48 enough? Let's say we've got a /48 for one site. What we'll do is we'll walk through a sample address plan. Very simple, and see how would it lay out. So what we're going to do, let's assume we've got this 48 for a site from Aaron or from an ISP. Your subnet ID, you can have, we've got 16 bits, so we've got 2 to the 16, or 65,535 actually, network segments. And for the interface ID, you've got 2 to the 64th. You've got quite a bit of room in your interface ID. But again, let's not touch that. Let's not touch that interface ID. Let's leave it alone. Let's just leave this part open. So immediately when some people see this, the 65,536, they say, well, you know, I have more subnets than that. Of course, the thinking is, do you have more subnets than that in any one site? And of course, maybe that is true. Maybe you do. But anyway, it's just something to think about, is, you know, is 148 enough? Or maybe for that site, you need multiple. But it's, how do I say it? One of the things is, like, you know, yes, the IPv6 address is very large, but there are some constraining factors. And I would say this is one constraining factor. For a lot of people, that's not a constraint. I do know some enterprises for whom it is a constraint. You know, as I say, I always, this is an interesting little thing. I always like to just throw that out about will the host ID last us? And as I say, let me go past this, because it's as I say, it's just cute about, like, what a /64 gets you. You know, the /64, the number of hosts you can do is somewhere between the size of the solar system and 1/3 of a light year. Yes, that might be enough. So what do you want to do once you've got your address, or once you've thought of an address? Well, start thinking of how you're going to do your subnets and what you're going to do your subnets for. Are you going to do it for each each building? Are you going to do it for a particular room in a hostel? What is it that you're going to do? And what is your scheme going to be? So now, one of the things that we want to do is we want to stop IPv4 thinking. And one of the things that we've thought about when we're doing address planning in IPv4, there's a couple of things. One, there's no broadcast address. You don't have the broadcast address, network address, and the gateway address. As we generally, when we did IPv4 address planning, pretty much those three in our minds were fixed. You know, you have your broadcast address as your FF or 255. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. And you know, the .1 may be your gateway address, but that doesn't exist. So stop thinking about that. And you've got many more hosts per subnet. And the reason I bring that up is that if you just convert your IPv4 plan to your IPv6 plan, you're bringing forward some IPv4 limitation. And I'll show you how that goes. So know that you don't have 255 hosts per subnet. You've got a lot more. And also you don't have NAT. And so that whole thing is gone. I mean, that leads to its own issues in the firewall, but you're not thinking about, I'm going to NAT here, I'm going to NAT there. That is gone. So let's do a very simple address plan, okay? So what I've done here is that I've said to my internet registry is that I have a number of sites. I have more than 12, but less than or equal to 192 sites. Because what I'm saying is that I have 50 regions, and so I will qualify for a /40 grand. And so my registry gives me a number that looks something like this. 2001 :DB8:56, and then I have up that 40. So let's say that I'm a nationwide company. Let's say I'm in whatever, pick your country. And say your country has 50 regions, 50 areas, and I'm going to put 100 offices in each region and 100 departments per office. Like, this is just, of course, to keep the numbers somewhat simple to work with. And this is my initial allocation right here. So what do I do first? So I say, well, all righty. I heard that I'm supposed to make each region a /48. So grand, I have this 2001 DB8:56, and I can go from 00 to FF. And so that gives me 256 possible regions. Well, great. I only need 50, but I've got me some room to grow. So I'm using this last portion right here. And I say to myself, sure, let me start numbering. And I say, well, let's say I'm in the United States, and I say I'm in all 50 states. So I'm going to say Alabama, that comes first. I'm going to give him a 00. Alaska, 01, Arizona, and so forth. So I'm like, grand. I am very happy with what I've done. And then I say, well, then within each office, within each region, I'm going to give them a /56. And so then my range is 2001 DB8:56, whatever. And then I have 00 to FF, which gives me 256 offices per region, but I only need 100. So again, I got a lot of room to live, to move. So for example, let me take California, again, something I'm familiar with. Of course, you could, take Hyderabad, Bangalore, or whatever. Pick your region of choice. So I just start me numbering. I'm like Oakland, Shore, 01, Carmel Valley, 2, etc. So I'm just going ahead. You know, for me, this little exercise is just get started. Get started doing something. And if you have to redo it, great. But start your thinking. And I'm just kind of walking you through that thinking. And then I say within each office, I have lots of departments. Well, I only have 100. And so again, I'm going to make the next part the range. I have 256 possible departments, and so I only need 100. So I'm doing pretty good. I've stuck to this /64, and I'm going ahead and putting in my departments. Say for Carmel Valley, I have, you know, I've gotten up to 0200, which is my payroll. Engineering is 01, and so forth. Again, operating at a /64. And so, because remember, we want to leave that last part, the interface ID, open so that we can use stateless auto configuration if we need to. Yeah. So let's start making some rules for what we're thinking. Okay. And again, every organization is different. You can deviate as you need to, as you wish. This is just to get you started. So let's say we want to use a /48 for a site. We'll use the bits 49 to 63 for subnets and leave 65 to 128 for our IID or host. So one of the things people will do for probably many, many years is to have things dual stacked. Yes. And so they will have both an IPv4 and an IPv6 interface. Just a segue. I know I'm getting questions in the window, and I will get to them at the end. It's a little distracting to go ahead and take those, but please go ahead and keep filling them in. So dual stack. You probably will have both a V6 and V4 interface to everybody at the, you know, for quite a few years. You know, some people are being brave and going to V6 only, but it will take most people probably a while to do that. And so what we need to think about then is how are we going to manage this thinking about V4 and V6. And let me now tell you some things that other folks have done in their address plan. And one of the things we would like to do at INTC IIESoc is also start a wiki on address plans. If you care to, you can take, after you've done your address plan, you can omit your name. No, you know, we don't need to know what organization it is, and we will keep it complete. You know, we will, and just send us an email. You can send it from a private email, you know, a Gmail or Yahoo or whatever. And because I think it'll be great for people to look at what others have done. And that has certainly proved very useful for me. And let me show you what others have done. And in fact, some folks who have gone very public with it are universities. They really don't mind going public with it, but some organizations, of course, do. So you can submit it anonymously. It'll be a great help. So let's see what people have done. So what they do is something like this. They use their VLAN number as their subnet number, and they use the IPv4 address, if they've got any, as the host address. So we have something which might look like something like this. So you have 2001 DB8, whatever, and 201, and then 192.0.5:1. So if you do something like this, then what you're going to do is limit yourself to V4. actually, this thing should be a single colon. I'll fix that in there's a typo right here. What you've just done is you have now limited yourself. You've taken V6 and you've turned it into V4. You've limited yourself to 255 for each of these. And if you're using an IPv4 VLAN ID, you've limited yourself to 255 for this hextet. Also, for the subnets, you've gone from 65,536 subnets to 255. And so again, it may be very useful in troubleshooting to do that. And if you want to do it as a transition mechanism, that may be interesting, but carrying it forward, you may wish to consider if you want to do that. So again, another thing that people have done is they've reused the host ID. Say you've got 129, 150, 201, and then you've got 123. People will reuse that host ID here in the last thing. This has the same issues. You have just now turned, this is a much bigger space, you've just turned 2 to the 64th you've limited that to 255. Really, is this really what you want to do? So another thing that people have done, and this has to be done with DHCP because, of course, stateless auto configuration is not going to allow you to do this. Is you take that last portion and you start doing things with it. Let's say that you say that if you have something called D, something like that, then you know that this was a DHCP v6 assigned address. Any IP printer will have a B in there, something like that. Sure. This may indeed be quite helpful. You know, it's an interesting, certainly an interesting concept. There's of course pros and cons to everything. One of the things this comes up into is if somebody gets onto your network and starts doing a ping scan, if they can deduce your topology, it makes their work easier. Let's say I manage to get onto your network, and let's say I have a particular attack on printers, and I know that anything with a B right here is an IP printer. I mean, you can finish that particular sentence, right? So just, you know, there's always drawbacks. You know, because the other side of that particular argument is that if somebody's on the inside of my network and doing a network scan, I've got bigger problems. Very well, maybe true. So as I say, you have to think about that. There are other things that people have done, and I will go ahead and send you the address plans that I have already that people have said are free to and publicly distributable. I will send them along with this presentation. So what people have done is they've assigned according to geographical boundaries, organizational, for security type, and so on, and what your service type might be. My preference, and you'll see why, is geographical. And as I will go into that, because another very large thing that you need to consider is route aggregation. It's less of an issue if your area is bounded, But if you've got a large geographical area, if you're across an entire nation, something like that, entire region, route aggregation may become quite important for you. So, but as I say, these are things that people have done. The other thing that you probably want to do, now you could break this anywhere. You could break this address anywhere, and especially if you're doing DHCP, which we will be talking about soon, is you can say, well, I'm going to assign people starting at bit 126 grand. The problem with some of that is that it's very difficult for people to just at an eyeball, just at a glance, see what you're doing. And so, because people can't do like most people can't do like bit arithmetic in their head. And if you do something like and say break at a nibble boundary, for example, if you say 67EA is always something, 67EB is something else, say that's always my wireless. I'm just making things up, So then if you break at a nibble boundary, it's much easier to see at a glance what it is that you're doing. So let's go ahead and throw that in as another rule for how you organize. Let's talk about route aggregation, because this is one of the things that really people forget about until you go into production. It's kind of like one of those things, it's like, yep, this is all a great theory, but when you really go into production, like, yikes, it fails. And so what is one issue that can come up? Well, it has to do with the size of your routing table and the fact, of course, that IP is routing packets. What you might consider is that you may want to have your addressing plan mirror your geographical topology. So what do I mean by that? So let's say that you have a network here, and I've given this prefix, and these are 3 locations which are in close proximity to each other. So I've given them, I have 2001 DB8 5670, and I've given Chicago 72, Bloomington 76, and Normal 7 Able. I've given those 3 prefixes to those. So let's see what happens. And so if you have, when you start doing route aggregation, so what you're going to have is with that kind of a thing, things will, when the router wants to send packets, he's going to try to say, to aggregate to the nibble. He's going to say, what's the closest that I can come to? If I can get to 2001 DB8 56789, that's a /52. But because of how I have done my addressing, my locations, remember I gave them 56, because of what the addressing that I gave them, I'm going to end up with, if I do 9 AAA, 9 BBB, 9 CCC, something like that, I'm going to have a route that can't aggregate. You see what I mean? Because they're in different locations. If I give Chicago, New York, and San Jose, which are all in very different parts of the country, if I start with a 9 for that, you can't aggregate it because they're not very close to each other. Which is the same point that happens if you embed by department. Let's say you embed payroll, which is in Chicago, make that a 9, and payroll in New York, you make that a 9, and payroll in San Jose, embed that as a 9. you're going to have a whole bunch of /64 routes. You can't have aggregation. So be thinking about what kind of breakout that you have. We'll go back to the original address plan and see if that makes sense. But as I say, I'm stumbling a bit in my explanation, and I'm happy to go over it again. But I hope you're getting my point. And this is from Aaron. Is address space should be distributed in a hierarchical manner according to the topology of network infrastructure. You see what they're saying too. This is guidance for ISPs, but it's very, very good to think about for enterprises as well. Is if you assign by your geographical topology, you'll be able to aggregate your routes rather than having like a zillion /64 routes. We're going to go ahead and put that on our rules. You also want to probably leave some room because, again, as I say, these three cities are in very close proximity to each other. So if we use a /50, this prefix, even 56.7, that will probably aggregate just fine. But if we do Chicago at /40, 72, 76, and 7A, if we have a second site in Chicago, we can make that 7-4 and then 7 Charlie. So you leave room. For you've got time, you've got room, and to do a little sparse allocation so you can have you can add to that. So again, we'll make that a rule. Use sparse allocation. I'm going to go back real quick and go back to this very first thing, because when we first did this thing, this was the first mistake that we made in our original plan. When we defined regions, we just went alphabetically: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, and California, right? Alabama is not near Alaska, which is not near Arizona, which is not near California. So it's not going to be able to aggregate at this 560. What you might do is my southern region is 0, my northern region is 1, and so forth. You see what I'm saying? It's a much better way to think about that. It's at first glance, addressing by by the names or alphabetically seems like it might be good. It ends up not being terribly efficient for route aggregation, and then you can get, as I say, a huge routing table. Other things you might want to think about is privacy and security. We talked about it just briefly when we talked about scanning. If you go ahead and put for diagnostics, you put something like a B in the inside of your IP address. Yeah, it takes reconnaissance and DOS attacks easier for people. You also want to consider privacy addressing, which is changing the host addresses very frequently, which comes in a lot of the hosts, and people do that a lot. There is people have run into some neighbor cache issues with privacy addressing, so be thinking about that too. And of course, and how are you going to do your internet access? So let's think if we're going to do, how a reconnaissance attack might work. Let's say if we do something like this, all my FTP servers are going to be DF, something like that, AA for DNS, 22 for web servers. As I say, all well and good, but you see how that leaves you open to internal attacks, and also possibly also external, depending on if you're going out to the wider internet with that exact address or not, or if you're proxying it. What people are starting to do now to harvest addressing, people know IPv6 addresses are going to be a challenge for scanning, but hackers are smart. And so what they do is they'll start going into other methods, the SMTP envelopes, your server logs, email headers. You know, if you're going to have Slack and you're not using privacy addressing, they'll try to filter by your OUI. We talked about that in the other ones. Also try using the low numbers. A ton of people do stuff like this. They'll start, especially if you're using DHCP, they start with ::1. Of course, why not? Makes sense to me, right? I mean, that would be your first thing that you do is start doing that. You know, the problem with a lot of this is people say, I mean, how do I say, the controversy here is addressing by security by obfuscation or a proper stateful firewall, or, you know, doing your firewall zones properly. Yes, indeed, you should do your proper, you know, you should do security properly. And that is a whole issue about, you know, the whole, yes, well and good for you to say, do your security properly. What are we talking about here? I have multiple zones, you know, I have red zone, green zone, DMZ. What should I do? And yes, you know, noted. And we are thinking about that. And if anybody wants to work with us on writing some best practices, happy to have you work with us. Let's look at a Facebook packet. Always interesting, right? Here's their IPv6 address. And now I wonder how I knew that this was Facebook's address. Well, other than the name right here, they've got it right in their IPv6 address. And clearly this is not stateless auto configuration that gave them that. They're using some kind of DHCP to give them that. And in some ways, I have to say, you got to give them a hand. They're literally telling you, do your best. You know, we'll go ahead and tell you, and we'll start numbering at low numbers. We'll even tell you exactly who we are. And we're so confident of our security and how we're doing it. We're fine. Great. I think that's wonderful. We'll talk a moment about privacy addressing. And again, we've talked about that briefly in Slack as well. This comes into consideration when you're doing address planning. Privacy addressing needs to be something in your toolbox when you're assigning addresses. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, what you might want to do is assign multiple addresses to an interface. One address may be a static address or DHCP v6 assigned address that goes only internally within your internal network, or maybe another one that goes to trusted business partners. And maybe anytime you're using the internet, you use a privacy address, because the privacy address will change according to whatever technique, you know, that you give it. And it's not going to change, you know, quite this frequently, where you've got 10, you know, every minute. Although, I mean, that's a parameter that it's your installation that gives it that. And so you have new addresses quite frequently, and so people can't track you. Having said that, they will. The /48 part is not going to change, but people can find out who you are, that /48 part, pretty easily anyway. It's the other part. So another rule, remember security. You know, and I have to say, sometimes like some of this stuff, it's kind of like, sure, easy to say, you know, it rolls right off your tongue, but yeah, very, very difficult. It's like John Kennedy saying, "We're going to go to the moon." Sure, easy for you to say, right? There's some other things that you may want to consider. As I say, these how do I say it? When you go ahead and start trying to assign addresses on your router interface, he'll go ahead and tell you that. It's like, yep, you can't do this. There's a number of reserved addresses. And so there's something called a subnet router Anycast address, and that's reserved. But as I say, you can look that up if you want. You just Google subnet router Anycast address. But I'll tell you, when you try to assign a router interface, something like that, he doesn't like it. So there's a number of reserved addresses, and you can look at those and see not to use those. So you know, for each rule, for everything, there's trade-offs. There's pros and cons to doing everything. And you have to think for your own network, what is the right thing to do? And there's no mistakes. You did something, you learned something from it, try something else. As I say, I know a lot of people who are into their third and fourth and fifth addressing plan. Just try something. You know, that's how you're going to learn, is try something, put it out there, and you'll learn. And Mike will go through a lot of things with you next week as well. So let me end with a couple of things. There's a little controversy about what we end with in terms of point-to-point links. In IPv4, like the links between the two routers, let's say a point-to-point link, we used to make that a /30. And in IPv6, there's a number of controversies. You know, it's like, should you use a /126, or heck, we've got a lot of /64s available. We can use that. You know, should you do a /127? There's a couple of these RFCs is how not to do, what not to do. But you can consider that. You can consider, it's like, it's discouraged, but maybe maybe you like that. And so you can do that. But you have to decide your policy for point-to-point link. There's also EULAs too. Again, that's a whole another discussion. Do you want to use EULAs internally? And it's such a big topic that I've left it out. If there's a lot of interest in EULAs, which are essentially what site local, site private. You know, it's like your 192.168 addressing. That would be done with a EULA. Then send me a note, and Michael and I will come up with a presentation for that. So to summarize, it's easy enough to get a range. What you gonna do with it is the problem, you know. And there's, you know, in some ways, I mean, there's so much leeway. They give you so much rope, you can hang yourself. So, but be careful. Be careful. Monitor what you're doing. Go slowly. And don't just take your V4 address planning thinking and go to the net, you know, and import that into IPv6. So next time, Michael will talk to you about he'll do the lab on address planning. Let me go ahead and take some questions now. Let's see what I've got here. Oh, whoops. Hang on a second. One moment. Let me expand this window here so I can actually see things. Oh, what am I doing? Sorry. Okay. So, oh, this is interesting. It is an interesting comment. Any device worth attacking is probably public facing, meaning it has a DNS entry. That's pretty interesting. A very interesting comment. Yeah, fun. Yeah, so that's yeah. So yes, and people know your V6 prefix. You know what I mean? It's easy enough. But it's the rest of it, you know. So you can't really think about it's not the prefix, because you've got your devices underneath it. You know what I mean? So just because they know your /48 doesn't mean they can get inside your network. Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. Yeah, so there's another one. If you get a block of ISPs from Aaron, how do you get it routed? Will ISPs cooperate? Absolutely. And you know, this is one of the interesting things. You guys know the whole internet exchange points. You know, May West, May East, and so on. That's for what do you call it? The Big Apple. Those are the ones, I know the ones in the United States real well. And those have been V6 for quite a long time. And again, send me a note. I know people who can really talk about internet exchange points and how they all work. It's a very interesting area. And as I say, they've been V6 capable for a very, very long time. So, okay, there's another question. Can we have a private IPv4 with NAT and an assigned IPv6 from an ISP public as a dual stack setup? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can. I do it all the time. Yeah. Interesting. There's some questions about link aggregation. Send me a note, and actually what I'll do is I'll ask Michael to speak some more about route aggregation. Send a note if you want me to go into it. I know I went through it, and if people want more, I swear, you know, a lot of this stuff, I'll just tell you, I had to listen to a lot of this stuff 10 times before I got into my 6th call. I'm just going to tell you that, you know? And so if you want more, if you want somebody else to go through it in using different words, then just send us a note. Yes. Yeah. This is an interesting thing. I love you guys. There's a downside to your addressing approach, as it also makes network management a bigger headache. You bet it does. Network management with IPv6 is going to be a complete nightmare. And you know, privacy addressing is a big part of that. And it, like, oh my God, do not get me started. There's also stuff going on over other interfaces that you can't really see. Send me a note. Because I love network management and troubleshooting. That is my bread and butter, and we'll be talking about it some in the upcoming webinars in August and September. I'll be doing more troubleshooting. But if you want a network management with IPv6, again, send us a note, because we're looking now to start webinars for next year. What kind of topics should we be thinking about? And yes, okay, and the gentleman ends with, yes, security through obscurity is no security at all. Sure, absolutely, that is right. Oh, this is an interesting one. There's somebody that would like to talk about using link local or site local addressing for inter-container communication. That is a super interesting question, and I believe one of the gentlemen that we're working with will be talking about this in DHCP. So hang on to that question, because we'll be showing you some of that in DHCP. Yeah. So let me see what else. Great questions. Oh, yeah, here's another, yeah, this is kind of interesting. Here's another controversy. Okay, it's not true that only public-facing hosts are interesting to attackers. Otherwise, phishing wouldn't be so big in the IPv4 world. Yes, point taken, point taken. Having said that, I think I know what the gentleman was saying. It's like public-facing things like your DNS server is low-hanging fruit. But if you want to do something like command and control, or do have a zombie for distributed denial of service, yeah, sure, go ahead and get anybody that you can. This is an interesting question about the VPN, privacy addressing, and VPN. Since privacy addresses are changing frequently, and some VPN concentrators don't like the source address changing, so the VPN server drops the connection. How is the industry addressing this issue? Very, very interesting question. And in fact, I know a couple of the folks at at IETF who are very into the whole VPN issue. So if you want to send a note offline to me, maybe we can get a couple of folks started. And then what we'll do, guys, what we're looking at doing is I get bunches of questions, to me all the time. And what we want to do is go ahead and start writing them up as frequently asked questions. We have one gentleman who we believe will take on the task of doing that for INTC, IIESoc, and for this project. And we're also thinking about doing a kind of a Dear Abby thing where I think we've talked about that before, where we get some of the folks who contribute regularly at the IETF, or really anybody who would like to join, and so we can start a communication between people, and then go ahead and start writing some of that up, because that's seriously true. The whole area of VPN concentrators really needs to be thought and talked about. And again, if we can do a good write-up, then a good thing to do might be to go ahead and start a conversation. I mean, maybe we can do something like, talk about it in V6 Ops, start a conversation with the VPN vendors and so on. I'm just going to say, I think that is the purpose of our organization, is to provide enterprises and large organizations kind of a forum to discuss these kind of things. Okay. Great. All right. This is very interesting. Oh my gosh, so many interesting. So many interesting questions. This gentleman is working with over 150 organizations throughout the world. What security functions can be done to allow their access to data and restrict access by the rest of the world? Wow, what a great question. In fact, I will, if you would contact me offline, president@industrynetcouncil.org, or my email is on there, then let's talk about that, because one of the things that we're working on, which is a part of the Aaron grant, is trying to define what are the problems people are going to have, and how should they think about the big problems in security, the big problems in application conversion. And as I say, we've done a pretty good headway in application conversion, and we're just starting on the security ones. And so I would love to start a conversation with whoever that's interested in what are some of the things that you see are going to be really big pain points. And if we have actual, this is my need kind of a thing, actual requirements, that's going to really help us. What our goal is we provide a way for people to think about things, and then we think about how to write best practices papers. If there's universities, other organizations that want to pick a topic and say, I would like to write the best practices on this, then great. Because, I tell you, no one can know the answer to everything. And believe me, I certainly do not know the answer to everything. I'm just going to let you, yeah, right off. I'm telling you that. But as a group, there's a power in a group. We can all figure it out together. And definitely, there's folks at the IETF and there's folks in the internet registries who want to help. You can tell by the fact that they're supporting us and giving us grants that they want to help too. Wow, this is really great. And do come to Mike's presentation and he will continue on with where we've gone. Thank you all so much for your time. And I'll see you next time, I hope. Thank you so much.